Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler video, and this time around we're going to be taking a quick look at a trio of DOS games which I've already covered on the show, except we're not going to be taking a look at their DOS forms, rather instead their Game Boy Color conversions. Yeah, this may come as a bit of a surprise for some people, but the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance both had a number of ports of games which started life on DOS. Though to be more accurate, none of these games are technically ports, rather instead they're reimaginings of the original DOS games given the lower specs of the GBC hardware. So generally speaking, they don't play exactly like the games they're based off of, but similarly. So let's kick things off with the first of our three titles, Duke Nukem. Or rather, Duck Nukem? It's kind of weird that the title sequence only oh, never mind, there's a missing E. Anyways, this version of Duke Nukem was developed by Taurus Games and published by GT Interactive in 1999. And at first glance, it sort of seems like it's a port of Duke Nukem 2. However, there's many differences between this game and that one, so it's more apt to say this game took inspiration from Duke Nukem 2, and has some elements from it, but is otherwise very much its own thing. Now, right off the bat, one thing I want to point out is that this game is probably the easiest of the three games that we're looking at today, but not because of the gameplay itself. You control Duke by moving left or right, can climb up or down ladders, you can jump as well as grab the edge of ledges to pull yourself up, and you can fire your selected gun straight ahead, upwards, or downward at a 45-degree angle while in mid-air, which is almost completely useless given how little screen space you have to work with. The controls themselves work well enough, but even knowing what you're doing, you're going to be taking hits all the time for a couple of reasons. The first is because you can only hit enemies while they're on screen, and they react very quickly when they see you. Thus, you're rarely able to get off one or two shots from your default shotgun before you have to jump to get clear of an attack, especially given that there's a big delay between shooting your gun and being allowed to jump, so you have to be methodical about when to attack. The other problem, though, is that all enemies explode when they die, and this explosion can also hurt Duke for whatever reason. Thus, when you defeat any enemy, you have to remember to just stay motionless until they're completely gone, which greatly slows down your progress. The levels themselves are somewhat interesting. They're mostly linear or with alternate paths, rarely becoming too maze-like to lose your way. But despite this, you'll want to try to avoid backtracking if you can help it, because enemies respawn, and the way they respawn is odd. Sometimes all you have to do to get an enemy to respawn is to literally just scroll the spot they were in off screen and boom, they respawn. But sometimes you have to get much further away before the respawn occurs. And again, no idea why it works like this. The only saving grace, though, is that power-ups also respawn, with the exception of extra lives, so if you ever need to farm health, it's not too tricky to do so. Speaking of power-ups, there's a variety of different kinds of guns, each of which has limited ammo. The ammo gauge is actually that square box right down there, which is not exactly the most accurate thing in the world, but I guess it does the job. And don't be afraid to burn through your different guns though, because all extra guns and power-ups are lost when you clear a level and move on to the next. A couple other power-ups you often come across are 2x damage, which doubles how much damage you do, and an armor vest, which halves the damage you take, both of which are slowly used up as you make use of them, as opposed to being time limited. One funny thing about that though is that if you die while you have either power-up, they actually remain in effect even though you don't visually have them anymore, which is more than likely a bug and not intentional. Which isn't to say this game doesn't have some boneheaded mechanics in it. And I already mentioned how every enemy explodes when they die, with the explosion being able to hurt Duke, but another mechanic in this game which really shouldn't be here is freaking fall damage. Yeah, you can get hurt by falling from too high a height. Now, I don't actually know if fall damage can be fatal or not, but the worst case I ran into left me with only a sliver of health left, so yeah, wouldn't be so bad if you could see beneath you to any degree, but no, you really do not have enough screen space to work with to know if it's safe to jump down or not. You just kind of have to assume when there's no other way to go, and if you see a gap you have to jump across, don't even take a chance on if there's a platform beneath. Another weird mechanic comes into play with this level right here, where you have trees with stuff in them. Now how do you get the stuff in the tree? By climbing them, right? No, you jump up the tree and land on the top of the trunk. A reminder that the game has climbing mechanics, so why they're not used with the trees is beyond me. Eventually, you also get introduced to sloped surfaces, which cause Duke to rapidly slide down them. Yet despite this, the first level which introduces sloped surfaces actually requires you to jump up them the wrong way to make progress. And yes, trying to do this is as annoying as it sounds and looks. Yet, despite all of these shortcomings and oddities, the game still remains relatively easy, as Duke can take quite a lot of hits before going down, and if you find all of the letters in the level to spell Nukem, you get an extra life upon clearing the level. Plus, the save system is actually kind of excessive. Most console and portable games of this vintage with save features will give you 3 or 4 save slots, but this game gives you 8 save slots. Thus, if you screw up really badly and lose a ton of lives, you can easily load a prior save and just try the level again with foreknowledge of how dumb it gets. Like this part right here, which seems like maybe you can make it across this gap, but nope, it's a bottomless pit, one of the very few in the game, and it's not messing around. Now fortunately, most levels have at least a few silent checkpoints sprinkled throughout if you die. And last thing to mention about this game is that it has surprisingly low audio quality all throughout. I mean here, just listen. I don't think it's possible to make grab bags sound more dull than that, and it's not like you can't replicate proper music in an ear-pleasing way on the Game Boy. I mean here, just as an example, listen to how well they converted one of the credits tunes from the old anime, Akazuki Cha-Cha. Wait, only like 2 English-speaking people out of 1 million are ever gonna get this reference. Wait, I got a better example. The opening theme for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, done in its entirety for the ending credits of the original TMNT Game Boy game. And just to drive the point home even further, this one was done 9 years prior to Duke Nukem on the Game Boy Color, so it's not like there wasn't a precedent set here. The point is, Duke Nukem has very low quality audio compared to what GBC and even original Game Boy games are capable of. So let's move on to a game which was done at least a little better, Commander Keen. Now heck, this one I actually own a physical cart for. It was developed by a British company known as David A. Palmer Productions, which had been around for quite a while, having done numerous other game ports and conversions, while being published by Activision in mid-2001. Now this game most closely follows the formula set by the DOS Goodbye Galaxy games, but is indeed its own story and locations. When you start the game, you're plopped into a hub where you can access the game's 3 different worlds from. Now, after selecting a world, you teleport to it and are then presented with a world map where you must complete each level in sequence to be able to move on. Though you can abandon a level in progress anytime you want to, and can always back to the hub to change which world you're going through. The goal of each level is simply to get to the end. But this is a lot easier said than done, and something I need to state right now because it's very not obvious, there are severe issues with the gameplay. Again, it may not seem like it because things are moving at a solid 60 frames per second, the controls are indeed responsive, and the raw formula isn't all that tricky. You can move left and right, you have a jump button and a fire button, being able to fire straight ahead or straight up. You can look up or down, as well as climb certain kinds of obstacles, and to take out and put away your pogo stick, you hold down while pressing the jump button. Though you'll also put away your pogo stick if you fire your ray gun. Now, on the surface, that will all seem fairly normal, but there's a lot of ways this is made unnecessarily difficult. For instance, none of the enemies are taken out from shooting them. If you shoot an enemy of any kind which is capable of being shot, it simply gets stunned for a brief moment. To take out an enemy, you have to stun them and then pogo jump on them. Now thankfully, unlike Duke Nukem, which had haphazardly respawning enemies, none of the enemies here respawn unless you abandon or clear the level. They stay gone until you give up or win. So there's very much an incentive to take things out when you can, even though the process is awkward due to the ray gun itself never being enough. Another awkward thing is that sometimes when you get hit by an enemy, you simply fly backwards instead of dying. Like, this may be something that's addressed in the manual, but I don't have the manual for this game, And even if there's a rhyme or reason to it, the fact that there's no visual indication here or in the pause menu means it might as well just be completely random. Now heck, maybe it really is. Not that it matters that much, because guess what's wrong with the level design? And if you haven't figured it out already just from watching this gameplay footage, let me spell it out. Every single level, all of them, without exception, takes place over a freaking ginormous bottomless pit, with gaps to jump across littered everywhere. It is extremely easy to die in this game, with most of your deaths likely being at the hands of gravity and not due to the enemies. Or sometimes a combination of both, given the knockback issue. Now, if the jumping controls were solid, this might not have been so big of a deal, except there's a problem with jumping, which is difficult to notice. Whatever speed you were moving when you jumped is the speed you'll be locked at during your jump. Now, you can switch directions, but your speed itself will not change. Now, you might be thinking, why is that such a big deal? Keen seems to just move at one really fast speed. Except Keen actually moves at half speed for a single frame before reaching full speed. For a 60 FPS game, you're never going to notice this, until you try to jump from a standing start, realize a split second later that you're only moving half speed, and then fall to your doom because there wasn't enough time to recover from that mistake. Granted, this is only a problem when you're not using the pogo stick, meaning you actually have better air control when you have the pogo stick active compared to just walking around normally, which is bizarre and backwards from how it really should be. But yeah, couple the tricky jumping controls with the fast movement, death pits everywhere, and enemies which sometimes kill you in a single hit and sometimes don't, and it suddenly becomes completely understandable why the game gives you 7 lives and 7 continues, since if you run out, you're starting the entire ordeal over from the beginning. Well, I mean, you do get passwords you can use, but the trouble here is that the passwords also store how many lives and continues you have. So this simply means returning the game state to where it was when you happened to clear a particular level. Plus, there's a lot of aspects of the game which almost don't make any sense at all. For instance, right here is a switch. Now, how do you think you use this switch? Physically touch it? Nope. Bounce on it with the pogo stick? Nope. Stand in front and press A? Nope. B? Nope. Start? Nope. Select? Nope. Up? Nope. Down? Nope. You have to stand on top of the switch and press select. You have no idea how long it took me to figure that out, because that's about as obscure of a direct activation method as you could possibly have. But there's this part right here where the hint arrow is telling you to go up, yet when you do, you find a moving platform which takes you over to above the arrow and then nothing. I mean, the hint arrows are basically supposed to let you know when there's nothing to find going one way, so you need to go another. But this hint arrow is either a flat-out lie, or yet another ridiculously obscure thing is hidden around here that I can't figure out how to access. Which is fitting, because this is about where my captured game footage ends. Commander Keen on the Game Boy Color is a better game than Duke Nukem in almost every way, but is far more difficult to play for all of the wrong reasons. Which leads us into our final game for today, Tyrian 2000. Now this one's a bit special because so far we've seen conversions done by developers who didn't have anything to do with the original games they were converting. Yet Tyrian 2000 for the Game Boy Color was developed by the same person who made the actual DOS game, Jason Emery, and was published by, no one. So the story Jason tells when it comes to this game is that he had a publisher lined up and that the game was nearly complete when the publisher got back to him and said, actually, we have no idea how to publish this. Which, all things considered, is par for the course when it comes to Tyrian's development over the years. So yeah, the game was technically never finished and thus was never published, but despite that, the game is very close to complete. So much so that most of what's not working are things which are supplemental to the game and not the main gameplay, such as an item collection system, which I believe was meant to keep track of all the different ship upgrades you could acquire. The full game mode and arcade mode work perfectly fine, and can indeed be completed from start to finish, at least as far as one-player gameplay is concerned. Because yeah, there's even a 2-player mode, but without an appropriate emulator which can handle running 2 GBCs at a time, it's a bit hard to test that one. Unlike with the original Tyrian 2000, where the full game had you collecting data cubes to learn the lore as you progressed, Here on the GBC, you get story segments presented when you start the game, at the end of the level, and when you beat the game. The arcade mode just goes from level to level in an instant, but the full game mode also gives you a screen from which you can adjust your loadout and save your game into one of 6 save slots. The gameplay, however, is interesting. At the bottom of the screen are your status indicators to indicate your shield levels, armor levels, energy levels, score, side weapon selection, since you can only have one of your 2 side weapons armed at a time, and a reload indicator for the side weapon. The way all of these gauges is depicted is with circles which get more or less filled, with each circle having 10 different states it can be in. So it's technically more accurate than using a simple bar given how few pixels are available, but I would counter that using additional colors instead of just 2 would have afforded even more accuracy with a bar instead. As with the controls, you can move your ship in all directions, fire weapons with the A button, use your selected side weapon with the B button, or flip between your 2 side weapons with the select button. Some side weapons will fire automatically when firing your main weapon, while some do not, most notably any which have an auxiliary function, such as the repair kit, which consumes your shields to repair your armor. And just like with the proper Tyrian 2000 and DOS, things go pretty fast here, and enemies often soak up the damage to an extreme degree. In fact, everything takes way too many hits on any skill level above easy. So if you do decide to play this game for yourself, stick with the easy skill and don't say I didn't warn you if you decide to go harder. The mechanics are otherwise very similar to the actual Tyrian, but with some added quirks. For starters, there's 0 feedback when you take damage. Since everything is moving so fast, the way damage works is basically every frame of contact with something which can hurt you does a single point of damage, adding up the longer you spend in contact. Now, so long as your energy doesn't zero out, some of it will be used to recharge your shields, but armor does not recharge on its own, and there are no emergency ships to come down and deliver armor ingots if you run low. Another notable difference is in how damage is calculated. Now, eventually I need to do some proper DPS measurements with the original Tyrian 2000, but here in the GBC game, the way it works is a bit unusual. Essentially, every enemy is only able to take 1 hit per frame of gameplay. Thus, if your weapon puts out more than 1 shot at a time, and both hit the same enemy, said enemy only takes damage from 1 of those shots, not all of them. This means you have to make your weapon selections based on how you expect to be using your weapons. Weapons with very powerful single shots are good against solo targets, but you'll be less able to deal with swarms, while weapons with rapid fire and multiple shots are great at dealing with groups and even bosses, since most bosses have several hitboxes, each of which count individually, but good luck dealing with powerful enemies en route to the boss. But then you have weapons like the Sonic Impulse and Mega Cannon, which are pass-through, dealing damage per frame of contact. Seriously, once you have access to a damage per frame weapon, grab it and never look back. At least not until you get much later into the game and start getting access to the really powerful stuff, like the laser. This all kind of ties into how this game was never truly balanced properly, because again, it was never finished, as I imagine proper balancing was going to be one of the last things done. Though one thing that might confuse people playing this game for their first time is that each of the different ships you can fly has a tech rating of either 1 or 2. Now all this does is affect how good your side weapons are. If you have Tech 2 instead of Tech 1, your side weapons will typically be more powerful and often have additional features like auto-aiming. Now all of that said, some aspects of the game feel like they're meant to be improvements upon the original formula. For instance, there's now a proper distinction between secret levels and bonus levels. Secret levels play out the same as the regular levels and are simply inserted into the normal sequence when you find them, whereas bonus levels are played immediately after clearing the level you were just on before doing anything else. And if you die, it simply ends the bonus level then and there, returning you to normal gameplay as though you just beaten the previous proper level. Plus, one feature I think is extremely interesting is the banana system. Which, yes, sounds like I'm joking, but hear me out here. Anytime you complete a level, be it in the full game, arcade mode, whatever, you'll often get bananas for hitting certain goals and having certain completion percentages. Then, outside of all gameplay, you can use the bananas you've earned to unlock super arcade modes, the ability to challenge individual levels with pre-configured setups, as well as special powers, which are all-encompassing buffs and debuffs applied across the entire game when activated. The more expensive the secret is to purchase, the more of an effect it'll tend to have. keeping in mind you can only have one power active at a time. Well, that said, the game doesn't give you nearly enough bananas. A full run through the game will give you about 50 bananas, and the amount of bananas necessary to unlock absolutely everything is well over 1,000. So yeah, that's another thing that likely would have been addressed had the game gone to market, is rebalancing the banana costs for the secrets to more sane quantities, or just making them easier to get. Anywho, that'll be all for today's filler video. It was interesting taking a look back at these to see how they compared to the games they were based on, and to let everyone know that these conversions even existed. Duke Nukem and Commander Keen were both commercial releases, but Tyrian 2000 was not, with the ROM for it being released online by Jason Emery himself many years ago on his now defunct website. I'll have a link in the video description to the archived page where the game can be grabbed from, along with a far less complete conversion of Tyrian 2000 over to the Game Boy Advance, which I didn't bother showing because, again, far less complete. As for the next episode of Ancient DOS Games, episode 312, debuting 2 Saturdays from now on May 6th, we're going to be taking a look at a highly cinematic but polarizing game, which, from what I understand, plays like a haphazardly assembled collection of puzzles and action sequences that you spend an inordinate amount of time automatically walking between, while dying for the stupidest reasons possible if you don't know where to go or what to do. So be sure to stay tuned to see my thoughts on this one, as I've got a funny feeling I'm gonna have plenty. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the people seen here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join in with them and support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK. By the way, since the Game Boy Color is technically twice as powerful as the original Game Boy, many Game Boy Color games are simply not able to run on original Game Boy hardware. Thus, if you find a way to try it, like with a Super Game Boy, you get screens like this one for Duke Nukem, which tell you that it only works on a GBC. And Commander Keen has a similar screen, though it's just plain text instead of having any pictures or anything, while Tyrian 2000 freaking works? What? Okay, I mean, it's interesting playing it like this, but I can't imagine this being very easy to make heads or tails of on an actual Game Boy screen. And even on a modern computer LCD panel, I'm having a hard time discerning what I'm doing here. Though it is interesting that the status bar is inverted for whatever reason.